our topic today is really, we're going to be talking about moving to an enrichment based model of anything. So, we're going to talk about how this model can work for daycare, for lodging, for dog trainers, for pet sitters, for dog walkers, for groomers. It can work no matter what. And I had just said, Susan and I started talking about enrichment for daycare about 6 years ago. And so, a little background for those that don't know the dog gurus. So, my name's Robin Bennett, and Susan's over there. We've been in the pet industry for nearly 30 years each. And so, I think that's right. It gets harder and harder to count that. But anyway, when we opened our daycares, we did day long play, which is pretty much how everybody, for the most part, did daycare for a long time. And as new daycare started, what were you going to say, Susan?
That's because you were one of the innovators and I was one of the pioneers of all day play. That's what dates us to being almost 30 years in this
Exactly.
industry.
Exactly. We've been doing it for a
That was
long time.
innovation then.
So back when we were doing daycare, when we started it, and it was a new thing, and believe it or not, Susan and I spent most of our time talking to our clients about why they would want to come to daycare, because
Yeah.
there was no, like, now you have radio ads that talk about housing developments that are close to a daycare. You have real estate agents that are saying more and more people are finding homes based on their dog's needs because they're having children later. That didn't happen when Susan and I were opening our daycare. So we did the day long play. And for many years, we taught that people should do day long play. But about 6 years ago, we started seeing a couple things. One was we started saying day long play is exhausting to your staff. It's really hard to maintain profitability when you're running it safely. And for us, running it safely means you have a staff ratio of no more than 10 to 15 dogs to each individual staff member, that the dogs are constantly supervised, which means somebody's always with the dogs. That square footage in terms of play space is 50 to 100 square feet. So if all those are in place, then day long play is very hard to be profitable. And it's getting even harder to be profitable because salaries and payroll is going up for across the United States, at least. So that becomes an issue. So that was 6 years ago why we started saying profitability is hard, staffing is hard, wears out your staff. And we didn't think it was great for the dogs. We actually said an enrichment based model would be better for the dogs. So we started at that point 6 years ago preaching this concept of enrichment, what we call daycare 2.0, to the industry. And a lot of people thought it was awesome, and a lot of people thought we were crazy, which actually was very much what happened when we opened our daycares. A lot of people thought it was cool. A lot of people thought it was crazy. So whatever. Then 15 years later, we're in that same, you're either crazy or
I
mode.
guess that's our comfort zone, Robin. That's where
Exactly.
we hang out. Our
So do you want to talk a little bit about what it looks like, Susan, for this enrichment based, how we started teaching it, and then we can move into where we are now with it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when we started sharing the 2.0 model, a couple of things about it that was really good for the dogs was that it was more scheduled. So they had more of a routine and they had more variety in the day. So what we talked about was setting up a schedule to where there would be some group play and probably in smaller groups instead of being in groups of 15, 20 or more dogs, maybe groups of 6 to 8. And so you would have some group play time and then you would have some individual time with staff because we know most pet dogs really like that attention and the bonding with the staff members. And then we really wanted some mental work in there. That's one thing that we feel was really missing from full day long daycare was that mental engagement for the dogs. So we talked about doing activities during the day that would be mentally engaging, which could include like puzzle toys, nose work, learning tricks, platform training, just anything to engage the dogs. And so it would be a model to where the dogs would come in for an enrichment day and have a variety of activities in the morning and probably afternoon. And then they would go home with a healthy tired instead of being exhausted. So that was the model that we set up. It was an alternative to the way they spent their day. And you guys probably recognize some dogs in your businesses, that might appeal to you. Some of the wallflowers, or on the other extremes, some of those dogs that are over aroused, maybe because they're, too smart and can be your troublemakers. And so it became a great alternative for those dogs. But then, Robin, you want to talk about what we found as more people tried it out?
Yeah, so we had a lot of people that sort of were willing to be those innovators to say, this is an awesome model. I'm going to test this out. And some, like Debbie Oliver, who has been on our Facebook feed before, actually, she did a thing with us last week on fearful dogs, but she was one of the very first people to implement it. And she implemented it 100%. She just ripped the band aid off and she said, I'm changing my whole model of daycare to this daycare 2.0 type of model. And she did that right about the time that we were talking about this whole model to begin with. And we learned a lot from her. She had huge success. She had clients that she reduced the number of dogs she would accept. She had some clients that didn't want to transition over to that new model and left. She found that most of them ended up coming back. And when they did come back, she didn't necessarily have room for them. But then what we also found was we had a lot of people that started it as a VIP program, because a lot of people, and this is if you're in this boat where you have a really strong daycare already and you have a lot of clients coming, it is hard to just say, I'm just going to stop, cold turkey, that method model, and switch to something else. So we had a lot of people we worked with that transitioned by starting first with just like a VIP option of regular daycare. So they would still offer their day long play, but then they would offer a VIP option, and they rolled out that VIP option with limited spots available. And every single time that would happen, for the most part, we were hearing that the spots filled up right away and the new daycare was super successful. And the dogs loved it, the families loved it. And with most daycare facilities who are doing both of them, they usually end up at a point where they have more dogs who want the VIP option than the regular option. And then eventually, I would say the goal should be to transition to exclusively the daycare enrichment model. Not everybody does. Some people still do want to keep their other model, but my goal would be to switch everybody completely. But what we found was that the dogs were happier. The dogs were still going home tired. That was the number one concern that people say is, no, the dogs need to play all day long and they're not going to be happy. And the owners are going to be upset because we're putting dogs in rest times more frequently, which really is better for the dogs anyway. But what we were finding was the the level of tiredness was much healthier. It wasn't that exhausted, I can't move, I'm not even going to get up for dinner tired, which owners seem to like, but they don't necessarily understand that's really not that healthy for the dog. But because of all the mental enrichment, they were actually still really tired, but not in a bad way. They were not exhausted. They were just mentally tired, but could still interact when they got home. So owners loved it. The dogs had fun. The staff loved it. And we started talking to people about making this like a career step up for your staff. So you can teach them the basics. And as they get better, they can move up, so to speak, with an acceptable increase in pay in some respects to the VIP model of daycare, which a lot of the staff find more fun because they're not just standing around. The common model that Susan and I talked about was you're like a lifeguard where you're just standing around watching and supervising. And we all know that's exhausting. You still have to watch and supervise with enrichment, but it's a lot more fun. There's a lot more interaction you can do. And you're not just standing there trying to make sure that things don't get out of hand. So because the groups are smaller, it's a lot more engaging for the staff, and the staff can be a lot more engaging with the dog. And then lastly, it's more profitable because like that's number one biggest thing that we would be looking at. Obviously the safety and health of the dogs is hugely important, but if we can do that and make more money, like it's a no-brainer. Honestly, it's a no-brainer. So on average, our clients were charging anywhere from 10 to 20, usually I would say in the 10 to $15 range a day more than regular daycare on average. Some jumped even higher than that. We had some people that rent jumped up to like $60 a day because of the value they were adding. But on average, most of them were like, oh, I'm charging $30 a day for daycare. I'm going to switch to 45 for daycare 2.0. So the biggest emotional hurdle is for you as the business owner to accept that people will actually pay that, and they will. And no matter, and we saw that in rural areas, we saw that in cities, we saw that in suburbs. It didn't matter where these places were located, they could usually increase their pricing $10 to $15 for doing enrichment. So it's a huge benefit to your staff and to your business. The oftentimes you do need more staff, but in the long run, because you're getting more per dog, you end up paying for that pretty easily. All right, I was going to say something else, Susan, then I forgot. So I'll throw it back to you for any.
I'm sure it'll come to you. So yeah, as you said, Robin, we started doing little mastermind sessions with small groups of business owners that transition to this model. And the reason we became so enthusiastic about it was because of the results that Robin described for the businesses. And we really didn't have anybody regret changing or adding this to their model. And so when you have a win for the dogs, a win for your team, a win for the business, it is just like a no-brainer, which is why we feel like everybody should be offering this as at least an option as a daycare option, if not change your model over. And there are more people doing it, but it's still pretty early. And I think coming out of COVID, because we know you guys are challenged finding staff, it would be a great model to consider, because as Robin mentioned, with the higher price points, you can take fewer dogs and make more money, and again have something engaging for your staff to do, because your key core staff members would love to actually be playing with the dogs, which everybody assumes we do in daycare, but we really can't because it isn't safe. And with enrichment, you really are. You're leading activities and really engaging with them. So we haven't talked about this in a while because we were so busy with just helping everybody get through COVID that we decided that now is a really good time to bring this back up and remind people who haven't taken the plunge yet that all results and case studies we've seen have been really positive.
Yeah, and I know we have a couple people on here from Canada, also someone from Mexico, so that's awesome. I know Canada is in a lot of areas is still pretty shut down, and I will say that we saw a huge surge in facilities who decided they would make the transition to daycare 2.0. They kept saying, I want to do it, I want to do it, just don't have time, it's just too stressful, whatever. And then when COVID shut everything down in the United States, we had a ton of people say, okay, this is the time. I'm just going to reopen after COVID with a new model of daycare. And so it did help them to just push the button and go for it. And so if you're in that area where if you're in Canada and are still shut down, this is a great time to look at the bright side, to say, take this time where you don't have clients or you can't have clients and reformat everything. And when you open back up, announce a totally new program. And it's easy at that time also to increase your prices because you are rolling out a whole new program. Mm-hmm. So if for those that are finding you're really busy and you have too many dogs, this is another reason. One of the other main reasons prior to COVID that we saw people transition was that they were getting so many dogs, they stopped feeling comfortable with how safe everything was getting. And just the chaos of all the new dogs every day, and for your staff, for the business, all of that churn, it's good because you have clients, but it can be overwhelming and stressful too. And if it starts to impact the safety, that's a huge issue. So we had pre-COVID, we had a lot of people that were like, I want to try this because I want fewer clients. And my motto is always more money, less work, more money. That's always a good thing. So in this transition, if you have an active daycare, day-long play, you might transition and end up with fewer dogs. And that is, I think, a mental hurdle, because some people's goal is just to help as many dogs as possible. And that's a great goal. And if that's your goal, then I would definitely pursue that. But I would pursue that in the safest way possible and the way that will make you the most money. And our standpoint has always been for businesses to succeed, the businesses that are going to stay around the longest, and by that in itself, you're going to help more dogs, are the ones that are making a profit, not the ones that are just have really big hearts, but are going to go out of business because they can't sustain their business. So being sustainable as a business in terms of money, in terms of not burning out, is important. And this model will help you do that. So Daycare 2.0 can help you to weed out maybe some of the clients that you don't necessarily need or want, and then have a really good clientele that's paying more, which is a lot easier on your staff and on your business. So there's just a ton of reasons to do it. So Mickey said, let me just put this up here. They will pay for it. We went from $19 to $30 per day. We ripped the Band-Aid off. It did take a lot of discussion with the owners, but once it was all explained, it went well. So thanks, Mickey. I appreciate you posting that out there. And I will say, I guess, to go back to how would you roll this out, Susan? Like, what are the first steps you need to figure out? And by the way, we are going to be doing a free webinar that goes into a lot of more detail on all of this. And I'll put the registration link to the webinar in the comments in a second. But on the 22nd of June, we're actually going to do probably a 90-minute or so webinar where we'll do this a lot more step-by-step in a teaching model. We're just chatting about it now. But if you have questions, definitely let us know in the chat box and we'll be sure to answer them. But what would be the beginning step to figuring out how to start this whole transition?
Yeah, I think one of the first things to do is you've got to decide how you see this fitting into your business model. So are you thinking you want to do what Mickey did and rip the Band-Aid off and convert over? Or do you want to add it on as an option, like Robin said, a VIP? Or do you want to include it in some of the other services? I think what we found out after it was so successful in daycare was this actually could be offered for lodging, dog walking, and recently we had a groomer that just took off with adding some enrichment to it. So it isn't just daycare, but that's where we started. So that's where we often talk about it a lot. So one, figuring out your strategy, how you're going to incorporate it into your business model. And then number two would be to figure out the activities that you would want to do. What would be enrichment activities that you have space for, interest in doing, and once you have an idea of activities, you outline a schedule of how it would work so that you can figure out how a rotation through activities might work in your center, or if you're taking it to your clients, what you can do as far as that goes. And so once you've got that figured out, you want to then beta test. And that would mean taking some dogs that are coming in and try it out before you are charging clients for it, because you want to be operationally sound when you go and roll this out, especially if you're charging more, which you should, because the value is there as well as your costs. As Robin said, it might require an extra staff person, but I think you'll find it pays for that and more, especially with the engagement of the staff. Those would be the first things. And then once you beta test, we say also to take a lot of pictures and video during the beta test that you can then use in marketing when you actually roll it out. So you pick a date that you're going to start offering it. And depending on how you're implementing it in your business would be how long that lead time needs to be. Mickey said, because she did a conversion, there was a lot of discussion with clients about what that meant to them.
Yeah, and I would say a couple of things, which, by the way, Debbie Oliver's here. Debbie, I don't know if you were on earlier. I was talking about you. Maybe your ears are burning. But Debbie said we did a test schedule before we even let anyone know we were thinking about it, before I ripped off the Band-Aid. And yeah, that we would definitely recommend, because here's the thing. For those of you that already have daycare and you have clients coming all the time, just take some of those clients and set up that beta test and run through the day with them. You can let your clients know you're doing that. And you can say, hey, because clients are going to love that. You're going to be like, hey, your dog is so awesome. We use them for our whole test of our new daycare model. And here's what we did. And here's some pictures. And they're going to love it. And you're not charging them extra at that point. You're just really testing the whole system. It's like you have an environment where you can easily test all kinds of things and decide really what's the best way. That gives you a chance for your staff to figure out how it's going to work. For the dogs, you'll see how much fun the dogs are going to have. And for the owners, you can get some of those owners to start getting buy-in for the whole thing to begin with as well. But a couple other things it was good, Debbie. Everything I said about you was wonderful. A couple other things I was going to say, piggybacking off of Susan's comments. One is with the activities, there are so many activities you can do. So where we find people get overwhelmed is there's so many activities. They come up with this really complex schedule of 12 different things they're going to do during the day. And that you might evolve to that, but what we would say is just keep it super simple to begin with. Come up with 4 different activities and just rotate through those 4. And one of those activities should be a rest time, where maybe they're in an enclosure or someplace safe where they can do a puzzle toy by themselves or something like that. So not all of the, and then one of the activities is going to be group play, just like you might normally do it, but we would recommend smaller groups. So usually if you might already have really small groups, but we would usually say for enrichment daycare, the groups are anywhere from like 6 to 8. So you're still going to include that. And then just add on maybe two, maybe three other different things. So you're only rotating them through 4 to 5 things, not 12 things, at least initially, because it's just going to make your life easier. So that's my first tip. The second thing that Susan mentioned was just figuring out your space. I will say that Daycare 2.0, especially, is a model that requires less space in a lot of senses because you can do some of these activities in smaller rooms. This is also why the enrichment model we found works so well for groomers and for trainers and for going to people's homes. So pet sitting or dog walkers, like it works for everything. And we didn't initially teach other service professionals to do this, but especially through COVID, because everyone was pivoting. And like Susan said, we did start to see very successful implementation of this enrichment model with activities that are catered to the pet, implemented by pretty much everyone in the pet industry. So dog walkers, pet sitters, daycare, obviously. We weren't having lodging, but you can't, obviously during COVID, we had very little lodging, but you could add this as add-on activities for lodging. And then trainers can definitely do it. And you can do this both in home. So we saw people, especially pets, dog walkers, that were doing these activities in home when they would do a dog walking visit. They would just charge more to do that visit and do the enrichment activities. Or we've seen this online as well. So we were actually pushing during COVID for people to set up a online enrichment type of program where you charge that person some kind of a monthly fee, and then every week or once a month or however you set it up, you go and give them some tool that they can use to do enrichment with their own dog at home. So the sky is the limit with this, I feel like. So I think that's really where you just need to pull your team together and figure out like what's the next step for your business. The last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to throw it back to Susan, is when Susan and I first started talking about this model 6 years ago, like I said, it was because we thought it was better for your staff, better for the dogs, better for your business. What we see now is the society is actually going this way and is already there. Really, you're going to find more of your clients are pet owners that want this one-on-one individualized care for their dogs. So the more you can build your business around that kind of a concierge, individual attention type of model, and you're using that language to your clients, the better your business is going to do. Because day long play, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the whole industry, in terms of the entire pet industry, day long play is like a commodity that is the lowest common denominator, and you're not going to make a ton of money off of it. Whereas enrichment, and really even beyond enrichment, any kind of social activities, you're seeing more and more bars and dog parks with social activities and food and movie theaters that allow you to bring their dog. And that's really the direction that she's going. But this enrichment based model of daycare is totally right there. You're going to have more and more people going, you mean my dog just plays all day? What are you doing with them?
Yeah.
So you definitely want to take advantage of that, especially with the prices of your payroll going up, because you're going to need to have services that are bringing in the right amount of revenue.
Yeah, what happens when something becomes a commodity is people price shop, and you probably see that. And what's tough about daycare is a lot of you guys are doing things right. Robin talked about as far as the amount of space and the staffing ratios, and your competition may not be. And so then when people start price shopping because they think it's a commodity and don't understand the difference, it gets harder for you to sell, which is why we feel like this is the perfect time to really differentiate yourself in the market, especially if you don't have many competitors doing the enrichment model in your marketplace, and just be different. And then it's easy to see. And people get it. The clients just get it. We often talk about it's like Montessori school for kids versus regular nursery school. And they get it. They see the positive results from their dogs using their brain and not just playing all day, which you guys probably know a lot of the dogs really don't engage in play, so they just hang out. And how fun is that? And so then they see their dogs really engaging and learning new things, they get excited and they're definitely willing to pay that higher price point.
Yeah, and Debbie said platform training is fabulous for this model, which I totally agree. Any kind of stuff you can do with platform training is great because you can work with dogs in such a variety of ways, especially when you're using the platform. So whether you're just teaching them, and I know Debbie does this, teaches dogs to chill out in the presence of other dogs. The sight of another dog doesn't mean, oh, it's a free for all. We're going to just go crazy now. It actually means you can maybe just relax when there's other dogs around as well. It's also great for taking photos. Like people always talk to me about rangers, like my brother. Even I saw him a couple weeks ago, my brother was like, your dog is like crazy, it like poses. And I'm like, platform training, that's all that is. I would like to say how, it's because I'm so amazing of a trainer, and I do think I'm a good trainer, but the reality is it's because I taught him to get on a climb when he was little, and now he will literally get on anything that's high. And sometimes I don't even tell him anymore. He just gets up there and, excuse me, picture time. It's funny, but great way to get pictures. And all of you who do those holiday pictures for Christmas or Valentine's or whatever, you want to make your life easier, teach some platform training to those dogs before the holiday season gets there when you need those photos.
Make that one of your enrichment activities, and then you're going to be ready. And you can disguise that the platform's even there; they won't know. And yeah, your pictures are going to be so much easier.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I'm just going to touch really quickly on, I talked about earlier, for those that are tuning in, that the price point typically for switching from regular daycare to daycare, an enrichment based model of daycare, you're going to jump probably $10 to $15 minimum, I would recommend. And the good thing about that is now you have fewer dogs, but more revenue coming in. And Susan, in a second, remind yourself to talk about the scheduling, because I just want to make sure we go into like because it's limited, you have to have a schedule and not have people drop out. But anyway, I wanted to touch on making more revenue, because what we are seeing in the industry post COVID, not even just our industry, this is in many industries, at least in the United States, is it's hard to find staff. So your staffing, the model of staffing, Susan and I feel like the model of staffing where you hire someone at minimum wage and maybe in a year or so you give them a little bit more money, that is probably going away.
Mhm.
You're going to start seeing that you're going to have to start hiring at a much higher rate, several dollars above minimum wage, in order to bring in entry level people. And that's no matter what happens. But in many states in the United States, some have already adopted this, some are probably going to adopt this. You're going to be forced to go to a $15 minimum wage over the next several years. So that's just the direction that payroll is going. So if you think it's hard to make payroll now when you're paying your staff minimum wage, you have got to get ahead of this curve or you're going out of business. And the other reality is, if you don't go out of business, it just means you're not paying yourself. And that breaks Susan and I heart when we see pet, because you guys that are tuning into this stuff, that go on our YouTube channel, that watch our webinars, and you guys are doing the best jobs out there. You're the people we want to see making money for a long time. But in order to stay in business for a long time, you have to be able to support yourself. And it breaks our heart when we see business owners who are doing such an amazing job and they will always pay their staff to the detriment that they don't get paid sometimes. And we want to see that change, because it can. You can pay your staff and give yourself a good salary, but it does require that you increase your prices and just start thinking about how the staffing payroll issue is going to affect your business in your state or municipality, wherever you're living, over time, because you're going to end up paying more than minimum wage to begin with, and you're going to have to increase your prices. So this is a really good way to start to do that, is with a valid program that is worth every single dollar that you're charging. So I would definitely look at that. But I wanted to have Susan touch on, because I just talked about you're going to have fewer numbers of dogs. We did change how we were working with reservations with Daycare 2.0. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, Susan?
Because you are setting up an environment to where you have smaller groups and staff dedicated to smaller groups, then you will want to ensure your attendance policies protect you, so that for most people that do this, like as a VIP option, you have to reserve your spot and pay for it whether you attend or not. It's like a child daycare because they only have so many spots to care for children. Then what has to happen to keep that teacher to child ratio is you've got to pay for your spot in the program. Now, some people also, because of space needs, when boarding was booming, would maybe do an enrichment for a semester. So they might start it in January, and then the semester would have ended like this week. And then they take a break between Memorial Day and Labor Day, and then they have a second semester. That could work. But people that converted over, that it was a complete model, I know Debbie did this, the clients committed to how many days a month they were going to come or per week. And they paid for it whether their dog came or not. So even if they went on vacation, if they wanted to keep that spot, they still paid for the days they missed. And this is where it gets to be really beneficial for your business because you can still afford to keep those staff members there, but you also can predict your revenue so much more easily if you have a number of clients that are committing to paying for a service on a month to month basis.
And you typically are going to have a limited number of spots based on whatever staffing you want to maintain. So with most people, like I said, they roll this out with a couple of examples. We had a lot of people roll this out with just a couple days a week because they just don't have enough dogs signed up. So they're going to do Tuesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They're going to just roll the VIP option out on those days. And that's great. That's a perfectly good way to manage your staff time and manage the clients. So you know how many clients you could handle those 3 days, whatever. What we find is within usually a couple of months, you're having to open it up to 5 days a week. And then usually within a couple months more, you're trying to figure out like, how do we fit more dogs at this higher rate in? And that's where your daycare may slowly just decline as your daycare 2.0 increases. And that's fine too, but it is a much better way to count on that recurring revenue and not worry about the person who's I can't come next week because we're going on vacation. Then you just say that's fine. But just like a 3-year-old preschool, if you take your 3-year-old to Disney World, you're still paying for that week of daycare of preschool, and there's nobody questions that. So that's just the model we need to adopt within our industry. And I do think that's more of a mindset issue than anything else. I think the biggest challenges that we've seen with people transitioning to this are all mindset issues. So a couple of them are here's the things we normally hear about why people don't want to do it. Nobody will pay for it. I'm just going to tell you, and Mickey actually said this earlier, people will pay for it. That is a mindset issue of you understanding the value you're providing to your client. And you're absolutely doing an amazing job, but you need to make sure that your clients know the education your staff has and the training your staff has and what you're doing to make sure the dogs are safe in terms of space, in terms of staffing ratios, in terms of supervision. Like all of us that do that and just think that's normal, I'm just going to tell you, it's not normal. There's a million daycares out there that do not do that very well. And so you need to make sure that your clients know all the amazing things that you do that you probably take for granted. And that's worth money. That's worth value. So making sure that you understand your value. The other common objection we get is that the pet parents won't pay for their dogs to be resting. And I'm just going to tell you that will not prove itself out. They may say that initially. They may be worried that if their dog's not out on the play floor the entire day, they're not going to be tired. For those who are the doubting Thomases, what happens is they find out that the dog is tired still, and it's a better tired. So that one is more of you just trusting. And this is a great reason to do the beta testing because you'll see it yourself. If you don't think that might be the case, you'll see it yourself when you do the beta testing. And then the attendance roster, that's the attendance issue that Susan just talked about, is the other one. Like, what happens if people can't come? And you just sell the package as use it or lose it. It's not even an option. And people, they adapt pretty quickly to all of that.
Yeah.
So I would say a lot of the mindset is really what you have to overcome to transition to this.
Absolutely. And again, I just go back. We have worked closely with a lot of members and followers of ours that have implemented this model. And I don't know anybody that regrets it and went back and dropped it as an option. It's just,
Yeah.
totally proven itself. And that's why people now offer different enrichment packages for their lodging dogs. In fact, I know some people won't lodge a dog if they aren't doing some kind of an enrichment activity every day. They believe so much in this is important for the well-being of the dogs and their care that they require it. It's just a requirement. We also talked about the groomer that implemented it, lick mats for dogs that didn't like being combed or brushed, and used an enrichment lick mat as part of the grooming process. Charge more for it, that handling, but it makes it easier for the dog. It makes it easier for the groomer, and it's not so stressful for everybody, and the clients will pay. The problem is, I know, and we heard this a lot, Robin, remember, people would go, I'm already doing this and I'm not charging for it. So how do I
Yeah.
now add more and charge for it? So what advice do you have if people are already doing these things for the well-being of dog and they haven't been charging for it?
Yeah, we did hear that a lot actually, which I think is, I love that because I think it goes to the type of clients that we attract, which are usually the ones that are doing all these things for the dogs anyway. But typically, I would find that that your client didn't know you were doing those things, or it was such a like soft discussion that it wasn't really apparent that you were so much different than what your competition might be doing, who was literally just like letting the dogs out for recess and not doing anything structured with them. So I would just go back to, it really goes back to your marketing, to really look at how are you marketing and what are you saying and what are you portraying as what the client's getting out of bringing their dog to your enrichment program. And it's more than just here's all the activities. It's really that you're getting the dog to use his brain. You're helping them to stay active, mentally active. You want to make sure that they're learning and not just and I would equate it to your dog's not just in recess all day, because I think those are terms that the pet parent understands, is to say, yeah, you wouldn't send your child to school all day just for recess. You would want them to have some kind of structured activity. And then, so making sure that all of that type of language is included in your marketing. And then if you have a pet parent that says, you've been doing this all along, I would roll it out so it looks a little bit different. But if you did have a pet parent that says, you've been doing this all along, then my counter to that would be, you're right. And now because we have done education and we provided this and we're doing all of this anyway, we need to make sure that we're charging for it at the right value. And I can tell you, those clients that are going to ask you that question, they're they're not going to leave you. They're the ones that are probably going to stick with you anyway. As soon as What I have always found is, as soon as a client starts questioning some of the stuff you're doing, usually they're going to stick with you. They just want to know, they just want to understand things. And then we've had tons of people who have said clients have left
Mhm.
and ended up coming back. So bottom line is, even if they do say, I'm not doing this, one of the things that Susan always recommends when people say, I can't do 5 days a week anymore, 4 days a week, maybe they were bringing their dog more often. One of the counters to that is, okay, just bring them 3 times a week then. And it's a higher price, but you're going to spend the same amount of money. And most owners will go for that, at least on a trial basis, and they'll find out it's great that way too. So maybe they aren't going to come the exact same number of days, but they're willing to come and use that budget that they have for fewer days at a higher price. That you might find that they come that way too. But we found that a lot of people did lose clients who ended up coming back. I would say the biggest hurdle to get over, once you figure out the planning and the activities and the schedule, is that time spent with the pet parents and making sure that they truly understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that does take a lot of work. I would say plan on at least several weeks of individual conversations, not just an email blast, not just a flyer put in everybody's bin. It's literally those personal conversations to make by the owner of the business or a significant leader. I would not leave those conversations just to all of the staff. I would be there myself having those conversations. And that does take a long time. But after a couple of weeks, when they all start understanding it, you're going to have a much better environment for everybody. And Debbie actually said, what, I won't lie, I was nervous. It took lots of conversations, but I think it wouldn't be near as hard now, because she implemented it several years ago, because more people have heard of it. I was also nervous about if it would be enough play, and it definitely is. So appreciate that, Debbie, as well. So if anyone has any questions, you can post that. But we just wanted to get this word out there to people to start thinking about this. If you're a brand new business and you haven't opened yet, I would not even consider day long play. I would open your business with an enrichment model in whatever services you're offering. At least as a, even, I wouldn't even do it. You could still do it as a VIP, but even my non VIP version would be enrichment based. If you wanted to add an extra special enrichment based enrichment program on top of that, I would do that. But I would personally not recommend doing day long play at all if you're brand new.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely market that you're doing daycare, but then when people inquire and I inquired, I would explain how your daycare is a little different and what you're doing that provides more value. And you may not want to put pricing on the website, which is fine because then what you're doing is attracting people that are interested in the great pictures and photos and schedule of their dog and they'll inquire and you won't necessarily just get the price shoppers.
So Nicole asked, do you still do a crated nap time with enrichment? If yes, how do you do it when you're full with boarding?
Yes, there definitely is a lot of rest time with enrichment. And so that's if you're full with boarding and have nowhere for enrichment dogs to rest, then you may want to pause enrichment during those peak periods, which is when we talked about earlier. If you weren't on yet, you may want to watch the recording about some people do enrichment by semester so that it's being offered when it's off peak from lodging.
Yeah, and we would still offer a nap time, and the only real change in terms of the nap time was a lot of times there are more nap times, if you want to look at it that way, than what we used to do. So when I first started, I didn't do nap time at all. And then a couple years into my daycare, one of my colleagues convinced me to try a nap time, and I did. And from that point on, I always said, you absolutely have to have at least one nap time a day. But several years ago, we started saying dogs are probably going to be better off if you give them more nap times anyway. And that's how enrichment is based. Enrichment, you're going to put them in a separate enclosure probably at least 2 to 3 times during the day. Sometimes when they go into those separate enclosures, you might also be giving them a puzzle toy. So you might give them a stuffed Kong and they will might chew on that for 15 minutes and then fall asleep. Other times they might just go in there and just rest. But there is a component of some brain toys that you can give them, which you really usually those are food based. And a lot of times you can't give them those kinds of toys when they're in group play, obviously, because you don't want dogs competing for them. So there definitely is more nap time. I actually
Well,
know of at least one daycare that stopped doing boarding. Like they are not because of COVID, they didn't do boarding. They started enrichment based services, and now they're like, we're making enough money this way. We're not even going to go back to boarding, which is interesting to me. And now they're closing on holidays, and they're not going to even do anything because they don't have to have that lodging fee, lodging revenue anymore. Obviously, that's not going to work for everybody. And as Susan said, if you're lodging, pick whichever is going to be most profitable, and over the holidays most of the time lodging will be, but that doesn't mean you can't do some add-ons, but it may mean that during high peak lodging times you're not doing the daycare 2.0.
I want to talk just real quickly about the additional rest times. Those, in a way, are also a life skill building activity. That how many dogs are we seeing are not comfortable being alone and resting coming out of COVID? So, building that back up for dogs so that they are comfortable resting alone, it has a lot of value. So, don't think that rest doesn't have value. It does. It's an important life skill for all of our dogs, and to be able to tolerate a crate, which is important in the event of a disaster that might happen. So there's really value to the rest as well as the activities that you're providing.
Yeah, and we just did last week, and it'll be on our YouTube channel probably next week, session with Debbie Oliver on fearful dogs. And especially now during COVID, because dogs are with their pet parents 24/7 for the past year, we are seeing a lot of dogs that are not comfortable being alone and are not comfortable in a crate. And we talked a little bit about other revenue streams that you can add. And on the call we did with Debbie, or the Facebook Live we did with Debbie, she actually talked about you can set up an entire program just on teaching dogs to be in the crate. That could be a completely separate program for dogs that do have some kind of anxiety or just have never learned how to be in a crate to begin with. But I agree with Susan. There is a life skill that's called, can you just hang out over there by yourself with without anybody being there? And that's a critical skill that dogs need to learn in a place where my owner's not around or whatever. So that's another way to talk to the pet parent about those rest times. But rest times are vitally important. If you watch your dog, just keep a log of how much your dog plays every day. It is not 8 hours. That's not normal for dogs. All right, Janika says, how long for small group play, mental stimulation, and nap time?
Yeah, I mean, it varies and you can set it up. I would start with 30 to 45 minutes and then rotate through. That's part of what you have to experiment with your schedule and think through, and also put pricing to your staff. But we pretty much saw that two or three activities in the morning and two or three in the afternoon will give them a pretty full day. So a lot of the day is at rest, and it depends on what your activities are.
Yeah, and I will say that we have this vision, those of us that have done day long play, especially where dogs play 8, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. I can tell you that while I was running my daycare, I also had a training facility, and I would do indoor dog park days, which was separate. So those indoor dog parks, the owner would bring their dog and stay with their dog, and we would let them do off leash play. Those were 45 minutes. So we did 45 minutes for large dogs, and then the owners and dogs were there for 45 minutes, and then they went home, and then we did a 15-minute break, and then we had small dogs 45 minutes. Those dogs were exhausted at the end of 45 minutes. So this idea that if you've ever gone to a dog park with your dog, how long does the dog play before he's just basically laying down and hanging out? It's usually 30 to 45 minutes. And I don't think that we don't need to necessarily set up these really long hours and hours of group play sessions. Some dogs will play longer, and most dogs, and you'll find this in regular daycare, after 30 to 45 minutes, most of them start to lay down. They'll get up when a new dog comes in, and then they'll lay down again. So I like 45 minutes 45 minutes to an hour for the group play sessions. And then, as Susan said, nap time and mental stimulation, sometimes those are going to be together, sometimes they won't. I would say those usually are a little bit shorter. And then if you have other activities, if you're going to do individual activities where you're doing like a nose work with a dog, or maybe you're going to teach a dog some tricks, those are probably going to be shorter as well. Probably 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. If you have a puppy, those sessions are probably going to be like 5 minutes. If you have a really young puppy, like under 4 months. So it really is going to vary depending on which activities you're looking at and how many dogs are participating in that activity as well. All right. So hopefully this gives you all some ideas on things to look at. And again, figure out how to do any type of enrichment thing, even if it's not full blown daycare 2.0, figure out how you can add enrichment to anything you're doing with the dogs, whether it's grooming, training, in home, online, pet sitting, dog walking. It doesn't matter. Just figure out how you can add some of these services into what you're currently offering to increase the value of what you're offering, and figure out how you're going to market that. Beta test it, because unless you're not open yet, you have a pool of dogs that testing this is the easiest part, and nobody has to know. So literally, like, if you test it and you're like, this is the worst thing ever, nobody knew. There's no reason not to test it. I would say test it, but I can't tell you of anyone that has tested it and said this is a really horrible idea. Everybody's, wow, I should definitely do this.
And
And
that's how you
you're
get,
gonna have more fun too.
yeah, and that's how you get the timing of the activities right for the dogs. Test doing a 30-minute group play session, and then the next day maybe test 45, the next day an hour. Test working with them on a teaching platform or nose work for 10 minutes versus 15 versus 20. That's the best way to figure out how the timing is going to work for your team, and also how you're rotating and where they're going. All of that logistically is going to vary center by center, which is why you really do need to test these things out to find the total schedule that works for you and your business and your dogs that come to visit.
But there really is no downside to beta testing this.
Mhm.
It's You haven't charged anybody extra, you haven't promised anybody anything extra. It's totally your opportunity, and you've got a live experimental room. That's what I love about it. Unless you're closed right now, obviously you don't, but if you've got dogs coming, then you've already got everything it takes to just play around with this idea and decide for yourself. But I will tell you that for your staff's going to be happier, you're going to be happier, your clients are going to be satisfied and happy for the personalized attention their dogs are getting, and your business is going to make more money. So it really, if Susan and I are just gonna be banging this drum for a while.
Yeah.
So-
Well, I really think what I've heard from our clients that have done this is our members who are offering this is that the clients that bring their dog to enrichment are much more loyal and supportive of the business. And so I feel like you get people that finally appreciate all the hard work and effort you're putting into caring for their dogs.
And that is a definition of today's pet parent as well. That's what they want. Pet parents are looking for those types of activities for their dog now more than ever. So Carrie Campbell, who's up in Alaska, she said, "You're only limited by your own imagination," which is true. Enrichment daycare is the bomb. And Carrie's another one that completely changed her model during COVID that we talked about earlier to enrichment based daycare exclusively. And that's all she does. Carrie actually doesn't do lodging. So for those of you that are like, how do I add this into my lodging? You don't necessarily have to add it into lodging. You can do this separately from that. Obviously, we have a lot of clients that do it along with lodging, but we have clients like Carrie who are out there doing it and successfully. But she ripped the band-aid off too. She completely changed her whole model of daycare during COVID too.
Because Carrie was one of those clients who wanted to have fewer dogs and less stress. And what she is finding, we're coming up on probably a year of Carrie doing her full enrichment model, is her numbers keep inching up because, again, clients want this and it gets hard to say no. So then you have to figure out how you can safely accommodate more, or you're going to be real strict and have your numbers, which could be then a membership, which we talked about a few Facebook Lives ago. So if you missed that one, check it out on our YouTube channel, because if you've got more clients wanting your services than what you can offer, it's perfect to add a membership component to it and make even more money.
Yeah, and that's, we didn't even talk about that aspect of it, is you can actually, the membership that we talked about on our previous Facebook Live, you can actually add a membership on top of Daycare 2.0. So you make even more revenue. Some people have actually, the membership includes the Daycare 2.0, but as Susan said, if you have a long wait list and you start building that client base back up, then create the membership where you have to be a member in order to pay for daycare. That's how that works. And so people roll their eyes when Susan and I say that, but the model's out there in gym memberships everywhere. So if you have a gym membership, you're paying to get access to the gym. But then if you want a special class, you pay on top of that. So it's the same thing. So definitely don't rule out a membership component to this. But I'm just going to say, a lot of people freak out when they start doing them both at the same time too. We would recommend doing them both at the same time, but I just know from working with so many people that a lot of people that freaks them out too. So it's, but again, that goes back to your mindset. It's the mindset of, can you show the value of what you are worth and what you're providing to your clients, to those pet parents? And that's just a mindset thing, because definitely the clients are there that'll pay for this.